Welcome to Will's Fuckery.
But yeah, I think talking, I guess, about music creation and like the copyrights and that kind of stuff. Like as you create the file, like you were saying, other people can kind of like take your work and then say it's theirs. There is a gray area there, um, as far as like who can claim what and ownership of that. So if it went to court over, like, say, like you were saying, I guess reiterate what you were saying before about people
So
taking tracks.
like sampling songs. So like, I mean, I've heard CDs that they almost had to put out as a mixtape because they couldn't go through the whole copyright shit. So they dump it for free, whatever.
Right.
Change the song enough where the samples are out. But then also you got, I mean, I'm sure if it's big name rappers, I'm sure
Right.
Jay-Z is paying for the shit. Or
Well, and that's what I'm saying too. Is so in hip hop, that's real. Like rap and hip hop, that's real big, and
Right.
it's kind of more in the forefront now than it's ever been. Now it's been done for a long time, but more recently, like hip hop has really brought that because usually people like Kanye West will sample things from a song, or they'll change it just enough. So there's actual
Well, even like the LL Cool J on XM with who is it that he works with? DJ Z Trip. They'll do like a Where'd This Come From? I don't know the actual title, but like, and like he'll play the original track, and then he's like, but now, and like some of the shit's like fucking crazy. Like it's not just like you got to have a strong fucking ear for
To
some of
hear
this
it,
shit, right?
right.
But other ones is like, what the fuck?
I
Like,
could have never guessed it, or
Yeah.
it's exactly the same. Like how the hell? Did
or
they
it's
get
like
away
some
with that?
fucking offside B track that like wasn't popular, but like
But they made it popular.
yeah, like I've definitely gone down like the YouTube fucking
Rabbit
rabbit
hole,
hole
yeah.
of like just that part of the show. Like it's cool as shit. I mean, even to the point like with LL Cool J sitting there, he'll play like something and LL's like, I'm feeling, and like he knows it's his shit, and then like when it kicks in, he's like, oh, like
Right. And but for me, it's kind of a gray area too because as somebody who creates music, sometimes you just come up with your own stuff, but most of your like ideas or what you're making music is always inspired by somebody else. So
Right.
it's kind of hard to as an artist to be like there's a blatant copy. And I think the big problem with artists is people who are making money off of what you did, if it's a complete copy or if the song structure. So with a lot of that sort of thing, I think certain lyrics, because some lyrics are very generalized ideas or feelings that most people have,
Right.
right? And that's what makes music connect with people anyway. Is you're usually like, oh, I can relate to that. You know, that has a lot of bearing on what's going on in my life, or I've been through something like that, or this is how I'm really feeling. So I think as other artists come up and they're influenced, even if they haven't heard of that specific artist, other people have tried to replicate at least bits and pieces, if not a certain style from other artists. Some of it's really original, right? Um, Prime example, like Sublime, they took a lot of sampling. They don't all their songs aren't even their songs. They created songs out of other people's works or bits and bobs from other like musicians and bands.
Yeah, but some of their older shit, I mean, like
Right.
those easy, like, it's just straight fucking clips from
Right.
that shit. Like,
Right. It's straight out of like the movies or the music itself. So you have, and that it's funny because during that time in the '90s, it wasn't like that stuff was still going on. It's been going on for a long time, but it wasn't looked at like a detective looks at stuff as much as it is now. It's more in the forefront of like, oh, that guy, you know, he's taking straight this sample from there, or he's pretty much taken their composition, taking the notes up a step higher or lower, or half a step or whatever, to just make it a little different enough that he can claim it as his own. But I mean,
right, but even though it's been happening, I mean, you still got like that
Right.
Vanilla Ice shit with like Queen. I mean, that
Oh,
was
yeah.
a big deal. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, and that's been going on forever. There was I'm trying to think of the one specific. Oh, Nirvana. Dave Grohl, his drums were pretty much a disco beat from a specifically like a band. I believe it was the Gap band.
Oh, for real?
And if you listen to like "Smells Like Teen Spirit," all right, it's like that oop clack. That's a disco beat, and he straight up admits he stole that beat like from the Gap band.
Oh wow! Like I
And
never...
he's actually told the drummer. He said when they were at a party when they were younger, he straight up thanked him because those beats but you would never know. It's a different genre,
Right.
and they were able to use it and make it their own thing. And you know how that turned out with Nirvana,
Yeah.
how they blew up. So it's like...
Plus, I mean, I feel like, I mean, even doing, I mean, I don't know, they got these punk go reggae or punk goes alternative, and it's like...
Right, you're doing covers of
Right,
bands.
so, but like, I mean, I'd like a good cover if you make it your own. If you make it your own,
right. If it's the song and it's done well, but you make it your own, it's not a complete copy.
Right. So then at that point, I mean.
Right. Now I don't really know, but if I had to assume, because I do make music, but I don't do covers of my own and put them on and sell them, and I'm new to that whole distribution thing, and I'm just at a point where I haven't felt comfortable enough to distribute my crap besides the SoundClouds and the little stuff that I physically put on myself. I'd assume when they do covers, there's usually a record label or a distribution, somebody's producing that record, and you'll have I don't know, 10, a few bands are up to 10 or 15 bands, and they're all doing kind of like you said, punk goes pop, or those reggae goes rock, or anything like that, and they've got somebody who's producing that record, and then they've got somebody recording that record and mixing and mastering. But when they produce that whole thing and it's done, when they go to distribute, they probably have to have permission to do those covers. Some of them, they might know some of the bands if they're earlier, recognizable bands, and they're touring still. Say, for example, what's a band that's a reggae band, we'll say Ballyhoo. Say they just did a cover of Blink-182's Damn It, I think, recently. They either had to pay to... Now, I'm not 100% sure, but I would assume they either had to pay to do that, to get permission in order to, pay to record that song. Now, granted, they made it their own.
Right.
And I don't know 100%. I don't know if they did or not. I would assume they're professional, so they did. But you either pay for that ability to record it and release it and make money off of it, monetize, as your own version of the song, or you probably have to have permission from the band themselves. Now, I don't know if they personally know those guys, but I'm sure they probably paid for the ability to release that as a song they covered.
Well, I guess if you're making profit on it, that has to be cleared. But if you're doing a live show... If you're doing a live show... It doesn't fucking matter. I mean...
No, I don't think... Well, I think it does in a sense. So there's these things called, There's these, royalty companies that you actually can go on as an artist or a musician or a band, and you sign up, and pretty much what that is anytime you hear your song, legally, anytime they take a track, whether it's Blink-182 or a club hit or I don't know, think of who's somebody, say they do an Eminem song, right? Somebody, when you go to a show, before the music even starts, the bands come out and they're playing an Eminem track over the speakers, right?
It's like an intro track walking to the stage. Okay.
It's still a royalty thing, or even if it's just kind of background music until the band gets up and starts playing, they have to initially be paid to use that, even for a background music in a club, before the show actually starts. I'm pretty sure they have to. And now when you're as I was saying, a musician, a band, or an artist, you have to register yourself and your music onto these things. Well, you don't have to, but you should. BMI is one of those companies. ASCAP is another one, and then there's a few others, but those are some of the main ones. Typically, what that does is that ensures you're getting your paid royalties. Now, say if somebody covers your song and plays it live, kind of like Ballyhoo, so for example, say they played Blink-182's Damn It, but they did their version of it, I'm pretty sure they still get paid a royalty, and that's the job of ASCAP and BMI is to, like, I don't know how they figure that out. Like, if it's a thing that whoever brings you in, like the club owner or whoever's doing that, has to register that somewhere. I don't know how, like, the back ends of that.
Right.
But I'd imagine if somebody did a video of them playing that song live, and it's a cover song, that Blink 182 is probably getting some sort of royalty
Something
out of it, even if it's cents or whatever. So I imagine, I don't know 100%, but I imagine that's probably why those other companies exist, is because they're supposed to be paying you and making sure legally.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure based on like live shows. Like, I mean, everybody comes out to an intro song or whatever, and it's somebody else. Like Clutch has always come out to Need Money by like Chuck Brown, like.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, like I said, I'm not 100% sure because I haven't gotten to that level with my musical career, but I think that I would assume, like from reading some of the stuff in the past, that that's what takes place, is that they are, even if they're using it with permission or not, there is some sort of, if it's copywritten material, it's gotta be registered, and when it's at that point, there's royalties that are being paid to somebody. So even if the band comes out and plays the cover, they're getting paid at the show, right, for the ticket sales and all that. But there's some sort of royalty coming out of what they're getting paid to perform that. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, like I said, I'm not 100% sure because I'm not on that. That's something we'd probably have to ask or look into, but I'd imagine that's probably what takes place. But I think there's also an area where, like, kind of like we were saying with the hip hop, like, and the rap, like Kanye West, where he would take a song, and I think there's been times where artists have had like rough drafts of songs, and they've put them out, and they've had to actually go back into the studio and kind of, like, I guess, redo the song. And they've taken the beats, or they've taken things from those songs that were copywritten, and they've tried to change them or recreate them to make them their own. And that way they could legally monetize those and sell them as their own, you know what I mean? So I've definitely heard of, like, I can't remember the name of the track, but I know there was a track, and I've seen videos and heard other people talking about it, where it's like Kanye West in recent years, like, has put stuff out where he had to go back and have, like, pretty much re-recorded the song because he pretty much took, like, beats from other songs. But I think it is a gray area because it's like, as an artist, you're kind of like, you're inspired and you're influenced and you're creating something with other elements that maybe you didn't create. So there's that artistry to it. And that myself, I used to be really against that because I was like, if it's yours, it's yours.
Right.
Why would you steal from somebody else? But at the same time, like, to me as an artist, if somebody took something of mine too, I don't want them making money off my stuff, but I'd be kind of like impressed that somebody took mine, and I flattered that, hey, somebody even if it was a piece of something I did,
it's still your shit getting out there. It's
my stuff getting out there, and I'm just flabbergasted at the fact that they felt inspired by my music and by me to make, to take something and create something new, or to take something and make it their own. Like, that's flattering to me. Like,
right.
Like, you know what I mean? So I guess it really just depends on the artist, the musician, or the band, and then the legality part of it is, like, are you really, like, hurting for that money?
Right.
For me, it doesn't mean shit because I don't make shit from my money.
Right.
And I do it just for the love of it. But if I could make money on it, I would. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, so, I mean, you've said it a couple times, like, you're an artist type shit. So I guess, I don't know, we'll do a little history type thing. So I guess I met you when you were...
Oh, man, I don't know the specific age, but I was a kid, man.
Yeah.
Probably 7 or 8. I had to be pretty young.
Right. And then, so your niece graduated high school, and we started talking. And musically, we liked a bunch of the same shit. And then we hung out, and you came over and showed me the bass and you don't have confidence in your music like I think you should. You're talented as shit. So you're trying to start this band, and so what's the name of your band?
Oh, it's called Dumbo Ruggly. It's kind of a goofy name. In fact, my wife and I stole that name from a t-shirt company we created.
Oh, really?
Back before COVID, yeah. We do kind of like the vinyl printing, and we just recently stopped within the last year because we just got too busy with work. But we were trying to side hustle, and we couldn't come up with a name for a t-shirt company that would be our own. And we lived in an apartment. Before we bought our home, we had this apartment, this really crappy apartment, and we were just like, we felt trapped there. My son, when he was a baby, had these little magnets that went on the fridge, the little, like letter magnets.
Right.
And for some reason, I don't know, one day she was cooking at nighttime, and I was fucking with the letters on the fridge, and I just spelled out like words, and I just came up with Dumbo and then Ruggly. And I would joke with her, and I'd be like, "Hey, baby, you Dumbo Ruggly," and I just assumed Dumbo.
Well, even when I first seen it, I was like, "What the fuck is this?" And then you kind of look at it a different way and be like, "Oh, all right, I see it, I see it."
Right, and so the Dumbo, the Urban Dictionary is like dumb, you know what I mean, and then Ruggly being ugly.
Right.
So for me, dumb and ugly, and I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm not dumb, but I am ugly. But I'm not the smartest guy in the room. But for me, it's like it actually became a moniker. So we used it for our business because we were thinking of what would stand out for t-shirt designs. Well, dumb and ugly,
right.
We'll do anything. We'll make any t-shirt, no matter how dumb and ugly or offensive. We're just trying to make shirts. You know what I mean? Now, granted, we only did like small numbers for like stuff. We made some money off of it, but we just didn't devote enough time to doing it. So I stole the name because it became more of a moniker. The more I thought about it, I was like, Dumbo Ruggly, like it really fits with my life. I've been through so much shit, like most people.
Right.
But for me, it's like I've always had these struggles, and I get through the dumb and the ugly. So for me, it's always been something that's gone on throughout my life, and it's like no matter how fucking dumb and ugly shit gets, I'm getting through. Like, that's just my thing. So it became kind of like a moniker for me. So I used it for my reggae rock band. And for years, man, like, I don't know, like, coming up with names and stuff, I was never really good with that. I was just kind of like coming up with concepts, but names or like specifics were always kind of hard for me. They were things I had to think a lot about. But I guess getting into like the beginning, I came from a family that was very musical. Like, my dad was into all sorts of weird stuff. He country, bluegrass, that kind of stuff, I guess, when he was a kid. And he grew up around the 50s. I don't know, he was born in the 50s, but he started growing up in the late 50s into the 60s, whereas there was a lot of doo-wop, and there was a lot of, like, R&B, and like you had the Motown was huge, and my dad was really into that kind of stuff. So like the Temptations and that kind of stuff, Four Tops. So I had a really weird mixed bag of music growing up because he was into a lot of that classical, that kind of stuff, and then my mom was quite the opposite. She was like a really rock and roll hippie kind of thing. She was into like Peter Frampton.
I would have never guessed.
Like Yes, those kind of bands. So like, and growing up between like at the end of the 80s into the 90s, you had grunge, you had all these things, and having older siblings, they were big into the 90s rap, the gangster rap, and then you had things like in the 80s with Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby's Got Back. And so I grew up with a lot of different musical tastes from my siblings and my parents. And then my grandparents would listen to a lot of that big band and like Frank Sinatra and shit like that. So it was a weird mixed bag. So I wasn't like, as a kid, I didn't have my nose turned up. Like, I feel like as time goes on, you like something. You go through this phase, especially around your teenage years, where you're just like I like certain things and fuck everything else.
Yeah.
And you get very kind of narrow-minded musically, and not everybody, I think, does that, but you definitely, like, have songs or styles of music you're, like,
I mean, I go through that as an
to.
adult now, too. Like, there's certain times I just want to hear, like let's beat the living shit out of you music, or
Right.
let's
You want something hard, or you
Right.
want something soft, or you just kind of want something you just want to vibe and chill with. And I think we all go through those phases, but I definitely think that for me it was weird because I remember being a little kid and VH1 and like MTV were huge. So like, we were always watching videos and Michael Jackson was huge, and I mean he was fucking huge.
Oh yeah.
And then you had like
I had the zipper jacket as a kid.
everybody was always doing the
Right.
glove thing or the ow,
Yep.
all that. So like that was huge, and then we put on little concerts in the house for our parents and stuff like that with tape players. Where you could record and stuff, but
A little talent show in your own household.
right on your
Yeah.
bed, jumping up and down like a fool, acting like a dipshit.
Right. So, but like music wise, so I mean, you've been in other bands before. I mean, you said you started on like kind of like the punk genre.
Right.
Is it just getting older, different brain set? Like, I mean, this reggae rock stuff now. I mean, there's bigger bands out there that are getting. I mean, hell, just the other month, me and you went to see Sublime in Rome with Slightly Stupid and The Movement. So yeah, I mean that genre is coming up bigger, but I mean, is there a reason why you branched from punk into that? Just a chill vibe, not as angry, like.
Right. I think my starting for music, I grew up, like in the 90s really is when I said I didn't start playing music around the time I was 6 or 7. My grandmother bought me a drum set, so I actually started drums, and I did drums in school, but musically, I wanted to play what was on the radio. So at the time, it was like Metallica, that kind of crap, and then kind of just whatever I liked.
Oh, so that's not even like the punk.
No, this is before the punk. So
Oh, okay.
so I would listen to the radio, and then as a drummer, like I would sit there and just try to learn beats, and I'd try to play along with the track. Like I would have like a little stereo, like a tape player stereo, and sometimes I would record the songs as they were on the radio, and then play them back downstairs and try to play along to them. But so I was very heavily influenced by all my siblings and my parents, like on their musical taste. But I played music for years, but when I started to actually, like, in middle school, when I tried to, like, start bands, I had a few crappy little bands. We tried to emulate, like, metal or this or that, but we couldn't really play it. And at the time, like, towards, I want to say probably about 7th, 8th grade is when I really started getting into punk rock. And now when I say punk, I don't mean, like, the early generations of punk, like the Clash and all that. Of course I knew who the Clash was at that time, but I didn't really like the Germs and stuff like that. Like I'm sure they were great, and I would have loved them then too. But at the time, I was listening to bands like NoFX, Propaganda, No Use for a Name, like the punk pop stuff. That was more of the skater culture at that time.
Which was huge.
Right. And around the 2000s and stuff, like the late 90s and the 2000s, like that blew up. So that's what we were listening to. And my brother was kind of, in high school around that time, and that's what he was into. So naturally hanging around with him, I always heard it. And then they started putting them on video games and this and that. But it became such a thing, and that, I don't know, I just found such a different love, and I don't know if it was because of the culture and the times, or if it was just appealing to me. It was music that I could relate to, and if I couldn't, like, it just sounded great, and it was different. It wasn't like the same shit I heard repetitive over and over again.
Right.
Not to knock any of that music, like older music, because I love all that shit, but it was something fresh and new, and something like that I just really like. Melodic. Like punk rock music is very melodic, and that's what they do best. And I think they don't get the I think they get more of the I would say they get more of the attention about that than they ever did before. Like you wouldn't think like, oh, punk rock band, they're very melodic.
Right.
Yeah, they're probably the most melodic like style of music in my personal opinion. I'm sure there's others out there, but they do it really well.
Right. I see, and that's one. I didn't actually start liking like the punk, like that kind of stuff that you were talking about, just because I don't know, from like the Misfits albums and shit like that, like coming up, the sound quality was so fucking terrible. But I get it. It was
right.
raw.
The horror
like
punk.
we're not selling to the fucking man.
Right.
Like,
And that's the weird thing is like when you think punk rock, like early punk, it was raw because a lot of those guys couldn't afford record
Right.
deals and they just played whatever they could afford to play. They recorded whatever they did. And as time went on, it kind of like other people set the bar higher for the quality. And then you had Fat Records with Fat Mike from NoFX. And you had, I'm blanking on the name, but the guy from Bad Religion had Epitaph. And you had the guys from Fukery, they had their own record label, and they were signing these bands and recording them. And the quality was fucking awesome.
right.
Like, that really kind of took it up a step for that style and that genre of music. So, like, when you're thinking punk, you're like, this isn't going to be, like, fucking, it's going to be raw. And I'm sure there's just some still raw stuff that comes out great sounding. And unfortunately, the technology, it's changed so much and it's become more accessible now than it ever has. But I think for me, it was like, shit, like, I gravitated mainly to it because of the poetry and just the music. Like I said, it was something fresh. It was something that it just fit. Like, it was just like, fuck the man. Or,
Right.
but even without the messaging, because most of the time, like, me as a kid, I was like, I didn't really know what the fuck they were singing about. Like, yeah, I would repeat the words or I'd know what the words meant, but I wasn't thinking about, like, for like Propaganda, very political band, very great, like, fucking musicians. I always thought they were like machines anyway. The music resonated with me, not lyrically when I was that younger, but the music was just fucking awesome. Like, I just loved the sound of it. And I would sing along and not knowing really what the songs were about. Now, as an adult, I do know what the songs are about, and if I still love them, but I don't necessarily always agree with, like, the message or whatever, but I love the song, right? So I guess that's something that has changed as I've gotten older, but as far as the music, I just gravitated towards it. I think it was part of the times, but I think being influenced from my brother and the music he listened to, the music naturally, like, the poetry of it, and the fact that these guys were talking about whatever breakups or whatever, it was just they talked about whatever, and you felt more connected because they were just like average normal people like us.
Yeah.
And I think there's this like stereotype, and we'll get into more of that later, where it's like, as somebody who listens to music or goes to a concert, you see a band that, like, you follow and you're like, they're like your heroes and they're like these celebrities to you. They may not be physical, like, celebrities, like, on the TV, but to you, they're a celebrity, you know what I mean? And there's that weird, like, I'm looking up to him, I want to meet him, I want to say, hey, I want to have, like, a personal, like, conversation with this person. And they're, at the end of the day, they're just normal dudes like you. And they have to deal with a lot of that weird...
Or you get that person that you're disappointed, like, maybe...
Right. You meet them like your hero.
Fucking dick. And
right. And I'm sure there's a lot of them like that. And there's ones that would come off that way that I've met or have talked to. And they're actually not. They're just normal people, but it's more of like a business to them, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of them are private. Not all of them are very out.
Yeah, but I feel like when you're hungry and you're putting out good... I mean, that's why a lot of bands... I mean, in my opinion, like, people's first albums are, like, the fucking greatest, right?
Right.
Because then if
your
it's a
early
big
stuff,
hit...
it's what gets you to where you've gotten.
But if it's a big hit, I just feel like they don't put everything into their next one. So now they're more money. I mean, everybody wants to make a dollar. I fucking get it, but
it becomes a business for bigger bands. I think they have to rely on, like, they know, like, as being like a musician myself, you over time, like, you start off here, you may be rough, your stuff's good, you like it at that time, and as time goes on, like, you look back at your own work and you're like, oh man, that sounded like shit. Like, looking back now, it sucked. Like, I didn't play the instrument that well then. The other songs are catchy and they're cool and they were good for the times, but sometimes you cringe going back to listen to your old stuff.
Yeah, but honestly, like, you're still doing that kind of feeling with your new shit, and I'm like, dude, what the fuck's wrong with you? Like, that shit's awesome.
Well, I'd be honest, like, I have this weird complex about myself where it's like it's a perfectionism thing, and it's like you want to relate to people. But for me, my number one rule is I've always made music for myself. Like, it's my release on getting stuff out, and I look at it as, like, not just like, it's music, but it's an art to me, and it's like poetry. Like, it's stuff that I'd be doing if anybody cared about it or not.
Right.
I just do it because I love doing it. But in a sense too, like I've spent so many years in a room playing guitar and teaching myself stuff and being influenced by all this stuff and wanting to create that, like, I know, like, I'm not the greatest musician. I can play a lot of stuff and I can play what I do great, like the technique and style that I do. And like for reggae, for me, was not my thing. Punk rock, like doing simple bar chords and like that was my thing. And I learned to just play it a certain way. And
But was that just young, like fast, sloppy, loud, like?
Even then, like when I was in high school, man, I knew my shit was kind of like it wasn't hard to make. It wasn't normal because I didn't know, like, music theory I didn't know shit about. Like I was in band and all that, and I tried to learn theory, but it just was like speaking a different language. And for me, it's like I struggled because I have ADHD anyway. So keeping my attention for too long, like if I couldn't do it, I gave up. I was just like, I couldn't do it. You know what I mean? So as time went on, like I learned a little bit of that and I've tried to incorporate it, but like I also like originality too. So even now, like even the stuff I put out probably doesn't follow what the basics of a song should have. My structure is like all funky. Some of it's there, but some of it's kind of just thrown in at whatever random way because it sounds cool to me.
Right.
And others could probably look at it and be like, this isn't normal or this is stupid. But that might make the track what it turns out to be if it's a hit or whatever, because it also stands out. It's not a cookie cutter, thing. And with music, it's kind of like that. Like you have kind of like when you write a paper, an essay, you have your different kind of like your subject, your topic, your opening, all that. You've got all those different patterns you're supposed to follow when you're writing something so it makes sense. Mine is kind of like that, but it goes off the track all the time. So it's like, what the fuck? Like,
yeah,
this guy doesn't follow any order. And I think that adds originality to it. And I wish I could be more like normal and radio friendly in that sense and follow like, I guess the template. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, man. Like, I just don't know it that well.
So when you make your tracks, like, I mean, what's your steps? I mean, do you start with I fucked with this guitar riff, or do you write lyrics and then go? I mean, is there a certain instrument that you get in and then build around there? Or?
Yeah, definitely. When I was doing punk rock in like middle school up till high school, I always just kind of started with like ideas. Like I'd have these ideas of what I wanted to talk about, or I'd have riffs, like guitar riffs. I'd be just noodling around with like my best friend after I got him in my band. And at the time we were political punk band, Political Sickness. Mm-hmm. Cool name for a punk band. Nobody ever had that name.
Right.
We would just noodle around. Like I'd come up with these little riffs and we would build upon it. Then the angsty teenager I was, like I wasn't out breaking shit and doing stuff like my friends. I was more kind of reserved and like I thought about shit before I did it. So I always was like the first one at a party. But
so you were a smart dumbass.
Yeah, I was a smart dumbass. Like I didn't know better. I was a kid. I don't know shit about life at that time. But to me, I was like, oh yeah, I have this idea and fuck that, or screw this, and I don't agree with that, and fuck you. Like that was like But I was also a good kid too. I came from a good family, so it was like, of course I broke the rules just like anybody does, but I also thought about the shit before I did it, and sometimes I would think about it and still do it. So it was like. When I did the punk rock stuff, I usually had a riff or a concept, and then I would do the riff, and then we would kind of like at the time, like as a musician when you first started, like bass was it didn't make sense to me. I figured, oh, everybody just plays exactly what they play on the guitar, and that's what somebody beginning would do. And then as time went on, like I learned, no, the bass could be like you could play completely something else and blend it in, or you could just like play the notes along but play it in a different way to kind of blend that in. So there's a lot of like nuances and stuff you could do. So we would start with the guitar. We would get the guitar part sound. For the longest time we didn't have a bass player, so it was just guitars. And then our friend Kevin O'Brien was his name. We had a drummer, and my friend Thomas Plunkard, who passed away. We would come up with these songs. I would do the riffs. We would add the drums in. We'd have a concept. Well, at the time, I played the drums. That was the first instrument I learned to play. So I could do the punk beats, no problem. This kid, Kevin, that we had, he was into it, and I was like, well, I can't do 2 instruments at once, and I want to focus on guitar. So that's what I kind of did, and I would sing. Well, not really sing; it was more of kind of like yelling and trying to be like my own thing, but it sounded like shit. He did the drums for us, but he just couldn't keep a beat, and I don't know really why, because some of the stuff he came up with was cool and he could play fast, but we just sounded like shit. So what I did is at the time I was using a crappy PC, my parents' basement, and it wasn't treated. It was like a little cellar, and it wasn't finished. Like, so the walls, there's a lot of reverb. I literally hung a mic. I want to say it was like a PG-48 mic, like by shirt, from some little like wall screw that you would put like to hold up little stuff like your keys or something.
Right.
It was a little gold screw up into the like one of the beams in the ceiling, and literally ran the cord and had it hang in the middle of the room. And I was using like Cakewalk, which is a really like, I'm sure it's a great program now, but back then like the computers are not what they are now, so it sucked and it sounded horrible. But the fact that I could record that and still get something out, it was very raw and crappy, but awesome. And somehow I made it sound decent enough for myself. And I wasn't that picky then because I sucked, you know what I mean? So like we recorded that, and I did all the drums on that. I did most of the bass stuff. Unfortunately, we did like 1 or 2 tracks, and then my best friend and our other guitarist, he passed away like during the time I was learning how to record. So like I had to do a lot of like the secondary like guitar, and there was a lot of parts where there wasn't a second guitar. I had a bass, and I started just doing like, you know, single notes, or like kind of doing the chord shapes of what I did on the guitar, but I just tried to play along with that kind of like, and I did a lot of punk style bass to go with it. And then I had a bass player named Mark Buttman, who was my neighbor growing up. He's like 6 years older. He was in University of Maryland, and I had him join the band after Thomas died. And he would play, because he was learning to play the bass. He would play, and he was into punk rock as well. So he would play the bass on some of the tracks. And then when we practiced, we had this. Our drummer was like, he wasn't sketchy, but he was like iffy. Like he got to the point now where he was a year or 2 younger than me. I want to say he was a year younger. So like when I was a senior, junior, and he was getting close, and he was really brilliant. So he was definitely going to a university somewhere. But he was squirrely because he'd be hanging out with the friends that would get in trouble, and he was part of that. And if I pissed him off, or we had a fight about something or a disagreement, he would kind of like not show up to practice. And it wasn't necessarily his fault, too, because I mean, we were just dudes trying to have fun, and I guess it just wasn't fun for him.
Yeah.
He felt too much pressure because I was trying to take it serious, you know, which is goofy at that age, really, unless you're phenomenal.
But even then, it's a different love. Obviously, it was...
Right. It meant a lot to me, and I think for him it was kind of like, it was kind of a chick thing, maybe. He liked doing it, but...
What, chicks or music?
Well, the chicks. He wanted to do the music to get chicks, or to have something to prove, you know what I mean? Right. And like most people, there are a lot of people there that get into music not for the fact that they like making the music, like they like the music, but they don't necessarily do it because they love it so much. You know, maybe a part of them does, but they use it for other things. And for me, it was like, I don't care about any of the other shit. Like, music will always be my thing. It's my outlet. Like, it's my art, but more so, the art thing has come along later in life. It's more of like, it just was something I had to do, and it kept me out of trouble. And when I was bored, yeah, I could play games, but I was like, no, the music means more to me. It's something I want to do. I want to learn, or I want to get to a point.
It would always grab you to bring you back.
Right.
Music.
And it was just something that kept me, like, busy, content. It just was, and I felt like I had to do it. Like, it almost was a job before it was a job. Like, I just felt the need to have it and to do it. So we did the punk thing throughout, like, high school, and then as I got out of high school, my buddy Mark was graduating, our bass player was graduating from college, and I added some additional people to the band and replaced the drummer, and we recorded some stuff. And it just with our busy schedules, because they were working in the real world at that point. I was working too while I was in high school, but I focused more on the music. But then it got harder and harder because I was coming like from Frederick County, like Frederick, driving all the way down to like Shady Grove, outside of DC to pick him up because he would take the metro. He wasn't driving at the time. And it got to be...
And then bring him back to Frederick just to play?
Yeah, just to practice for a
wow.
few hours. We would practice for 4 or 5 hours, drive my parents nuts because we're in their basement. My sister had moved back in at the time with her kids, so it was pissing them off because they're like, oh, you guys are loud and obnoxious. And my dad would always joke, he's like, oh, your songs are fuck you, and he's like, I don't want to have to listen to that for 4 or 5 hours, And it's just he would jokingly because a lot of our songs pretty early on in punk rock were 3-4 chord songs, so it was dee dee doo doo dee dee doo doo, So my dad was he would make fun of me and shit like that.
Play something else.
Right, he's actually learn how to play something, whatever. These kids are fucking driving me nuts. So we would do that, and then I'd drive him back to Shady Grove, and he'd get on I don't know, sometimes 10 o'clock at night. And he was living in Alexandria, Virginia, after he graduated. So it was he even had to go further. Now his parents lived around Damascus area, around on their way down that way to Shady Grove. So sometimes he would stay with them, and that was easier. But there was a lot of traveling. And later on, he got his license and all that stuff. But we kind of we had his roommate in the band who was a guitarist. He was a folk he could do other styles of music. He was real big into Jimi Hendrix, and I was like, oh, a dude who can solo, actually solo, not some made-up little crap. I was like, well, cool, we'll add him to the band. And then we had another friend from their university that they had, that they were close to, named Ron. I can't remember his last name now, but he was a drummer. He didn't really know how to play. I was trying to teach him, and so we had something going, but he was very lyrical, driven and stuff. So poetry was big to him, and he influenced a lot of what I was writing at the time when we were creating new music with those new members. And we started creating recording, but we just everybody got busy, and I felt like I was the only one really. Me and Mark were the only ones devoted, but Mark was graduating. He was actually working. I think at the time he was still working for AOL, which is weird because AOL wasn't what it was then. I think they were downsizing. They were kind of fading out at that time. But he was some sort of customer agent or something. I don't know. And at that time, I was kind of alone again, where it was fuck, it's me. And my best friend died, so he's not part of it. And when we were kids, it was that was part of our dream, is we're both going to be in this to the end.
Yeah.
Right. And if we don't do it with punk rock, we're going to find something that does work, but we'll play together long enough and learn together long enough that we'll get good at whatever we land on, that we're into, you know what I mean? Then I kind of went into a hiatus. I had to move, I dated some crazy chick. I kind of stopped. I slowed down on the music. I was still making stuff, but I was working a shitty job to another shitty job. I worked for Best Buy for a while as a warehouse guy, and I was still making music, but I was I was always pretty social, but kind of I don't know, conservative too, whereas I didn't really, I was more of kind of a loner. Even with the dudes that I was good friends with, I always felt I was the least person to fit in with them. They liked me, they always thought I was cool and stuff, but I always kind of kept to myself. I would kind of laugh and joke and be the clown and kind of have fun with them, but then I was always kind of the first one out of the party because I was, self-conscious, or I was just I don't want to get into trouble. So I was always kind of aware enough to kind of pull myself out. And at that time, working for Best Buy, I talked to people, I was friendly, I was always kind of cool with everybody, but I would talk about my music, but I didn't really know any other musicians at that time. I dated this one girl and got to know friends of hers that she grew up with, and we put a kind of when my band was still together, we put a show together as I got out of high school and was working for Best Buy. We put a show together where it was my band with Kevin and my bass player Mark, and we did this show with this other band at the time called The Shortage, which they were a punk rock band. These kids were I don't know, 3-4 years younger than us. And they were phenomenal, dude. They could play Metallica songs like Metallica already. And when you're when they're 15, 16 years old, you're what the fuck?
Right.
I mean, you're amazed. For me, I wasn't jealous of it. I mean, it was a little bit, but not really. I was always kind of more just amazed that yeah, I suck. Those guys are fucking awesome. But even with the punk rock thing, they made it sound good. And it's
Wanted you to up your own game.
Right. And I'm like, well, I want to hang out with these dudes. I want to develop a relationship with them. Not only is the girl that I was dating at the time knew them personally, and they helped me out by coming to this show I kind of put on as my senior project, but they were cool dudes. Like, they were fart jokes and like stupid shit. You know, I was into that kind of shit. So it was like the ability to get to kind of know them was kind of like cool. And I was like, maybe I can learn some shit from them and ask them some things, you know, about some shit that I'm having a hard time as an artist, what I'm having troubles trying to emulate or do. Like, and there's just like chords or how to play, like the kind of shit they played. Because I was like, the stuff they were playing was awesome. And I was like, dude, I want to shred like that, but also still keep that punk rock shit that they did. And I was just like, I was blown away. So I did that for years. I learned some stuff. I would hang out with them. And I was like older than all of them. So I was like a year or two older. No, probably like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years older actually. And because my girlfriend was like a year older than them. So like, I'm hanging out. I was like, what, 19, and they're like 16, 15 and 16. I think they were turning like 16 and 17 at the time. So they're a few years younger. But I was just like, I don't know. We'd hang out. I learned stuff with them. We were drinking because his parents were, you know, the brothers, their parents were like, they didn't really care. You know, they just didn't want them running out and getting in trouble.
Right,
So
have a drink, you're home for the night type shit.
Right, so they would let them do shit at their house and in the neighborhood or whatever, as long as they weren't out, like, creating chaos. And I've got tons of stories about all the fucked up shit that I saw and things that I was associated with, but that's a whole other thing for another time. But I learned a lot from those guys, and I went back to the drawing board. At some point, I moved from Frederick to Gettysburg with my sister, who was married, my younger sister at the time. And I was still making music, and I was looking back on the things that those guys had did, those dudes that I hung out with, the Shortage. And I was still kind of hanging out with them, so I would go to their shows when they played in Baltimore at this rock bar, this punk rock bar down in Howard Street called the Auto Bar.
Oh, so they actually, I mean, were they opening up for big acts like would come to town? Or?
Well, big acts in our minds, like the Casualties. They opened up from Municipal Waste, who's like way bigger than they were then. But the Art of Partying was out, and like my coworker was real big into the Waste, so it was cool to take somebody I knew who knew Municipal Waste and then be like, oh yeah, that opening band we just saw, those are my friends. Watch this shit. And we went up, and I was like hanging out with them, and brought my coworker along, and he was like, holy shit, like, those guys are good, right? I was like, yeah, man. Like, we hung out for years. I was like kind of their main support, and even to this day, like, they're not the Shortage anymore. They've had other band names and they've done other things, and they've gone heavier. They're still very thrash like influenced, but they've done heavy metal and like more of like groove metal and shit like that. So I went back to the drawing board when I was in Gettysburg, and I was like looking back on the earlier stuff that I was around for when they were recording, and I was like, man, I want to learn how to play with my buddy Mike. I want to be able to do the stuff Mike's doing, and even if I can't do it as well as him, I want to kind of like learn what he's doing. So I would sit there for hours listening to the songs that I knew already in my head, and I'd just kind of farted around on the fingerboard of the guitar and figured it out, like the bar chords. And I started adding in elements of like soloing and stuff around that time because I couldn't solo really at that time. And I was like, oh, I'm just gonna start like bending like the strings to make, you know, bending notes and stuff. And that's kind of what really, like, there's this thing called the 1-3-5 or the 3-5-7, which is kind of like the fingerings thing on a guitar, right? You probably heard, there's like people like Dave Navarro from, I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, he was from what, Red Hot Chili Peppers, but what was his Jane's Addiction?
Yeah, Jane's Addiction.
Yeah, that's it.
Jane's Addiction, and he talks about that though. The
he's like some
1-3-5.
tattoo talk show douchebag.
Right. Nah, yeah, honestly though, as an artist, like I always thought about that, but the dude actually kind of like musically, I think in his personal life, he's probably more chill than what he comes off.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, but certain people just
rub you that way.
Right.
Like, he's a muscle douchebag, you know, whatever. But he seems like a cool dude. I was watching videos with him and this other guy, this Virtuoso, and they talked about it. So, like, music theory-wise, like, I know more now, but I still don't know shit. Like, there are people who know a lot about composition and all that kind of stuff and could tell you this specific chord. I still can't do that. I just know what my ears play, and I know where my fingers are on the board. I know what sounds good, and I come up with these. So I could, like, if I have my band practice with my current band, Dumble Ruggly, I couldn't tell them, like, they're calling out notes and chords and shit like that. I just sit there and like, oh, you need that sound? I'm listening. I'm going to find it on the fretboard real quick. I can gravitate. I kind of know where that sound is on the board, and I'll kind of, just play it. So I can't, like, it's something I want to work on, is actually get to the point where I can, tell you what chord it is and all that, or what key you're in.
Right.
I don't know that shit.
So from the punk to the reggae, did that? I mean, when did that? After you had a kid and took a break, or?
Right, and I know I'm dragging this out.
No, you're good.
So I did like the punk rock, kind of went into like a heavier like punk rock, more metal, elemental, like, I guess, elements, and was still doing punk rock for a long time. Then I had moved at some point from Frederick to Hagerstown. Eventually was working for Best Buy again at a different store, and met my wife, and then we got married. Still very heavily influenced. Like, I wanted to do more of like Sublime kind of stuff, and I didn't know how to play that style of reggae. It doesn't seem like it's hard, but for somebody who like really was still learning how to play the guitar and doing just bar chords, like, I never realized how like easy it was, and I overcomplicated things a lot of the times. And I think most people learning to play instruments do, like, you overthink things. So for me, it's like I overthought it, but I wanted to play more like Sublime style stuff. And at that time, I was real big into like Slightly Stupid, who kind of came up with Sublime. In fact, they were mentored. The main members were mentored by Bradley.
Yeah, that's funny because you're the one who told me that, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, because the age just doesn't seem, and I feel like he's been dead for so long, but like, right. Yeah, I mean, I read about it after we talked about it, and I was like, wow, like, not saying you were gonna like bullshit me, but it just in my head it wasn't connect. Like, you're timelines were like a little fucked up. Like,
right. Well, growing up in the '90s, I definitely heard it, and then having my sister, who my older sister, that stuff was like big after '96. Like, after he died, like, they blew up, obviously, commercially.
Oh yeah, that.
So at that time, like, the Peppers were still huge. Like, they were a thing in the '80s, the late '80s, and then in the '90s they blew up. '92, '93, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, which is like one of the first albums I ever owned. So I was definitely into that funk punk kind of like they were rock, but they had a lot of like funk elements at that time. So that was like fresh. And then Stone Temple Pilots was like another big band that was into. So like the '90s had such a great like weird mix of different genres and like styles of music that were radio friendly, that just was phenomenal time to be alive. So like I was influenced a lot by that stuff. Sublime got so much radio play like after he had died, and that was like when my sister was in high school, around the same time you guys were in high school. Like, I heard it a lot in the cars driving with you guys.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? It was always on the radio, or you'd hear like a Stone Temple Pilots song or an Alice in Chains song. So those things were like kind of big. And the girlfriend that I dated, that I met those younger guys through, that other band, The Shortage, like, she was real big into Sublime. She loved Sublime and trippy music and stuff like that. But Sublime was like one of the songs she was big into. She liked that reggae, and she was kind of into Slightly Stupid too. So I'd heard it many times. I liked it when I was younger, and I don't know, I wasn't listening to it all the time. So like when I dated that chick, I started hearing Sublime a lot more, and I was like, man, this is a lot better than I remember it. Like, I knew it was good back then, but it's not something I heard because I stopped listening to radio when I got into punk rock.
Yeah.
Like, when I was a teenager, I didn't really listen because the radio was shit by that time. So for me, it was like all the older shit they've repetitively played for the last 20 years. Like, oh, new songs, and then there's like a new song from 20 years ago, or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, fuck, man. Like,
now it's like classic shit.
At that time, I was playing CDs in my car like everybody else. You had a big book of CDs, which is like non-existent today. Like, that's such an old school thing nowadays, but we had those big books with all the CDs and the sleeves and shit. So from that point, like when I was in the car and I had a CD player, that's all I was playing. You know what I mean? Was CD after CD. I wasn't listening to the radio because the radio had shit compared to what I was listening to, at least in my mind. You know, the
Right.
stuff I was listening to was the shit. So, you know, at that point, it's not like I heard a Sublime song. I would, but it was usually off somebody's MP3, or my girlfriend putting something of hers in the CD player. And it was later on after we had split up and I was working at Best Buy later on before I left there that like I would put on Pandora because that was a big thing. That started becoming a big thing where you had the internet radio stuff and you would type in the genres you liked or a band you would like. And I was putting in punk rock and metal shit all the time. And after so long of working and listening to the music in the background, it would kind of, sometimes they would throw like some other genre that was similar or kind of could relate to that other genre, and being punk rock, it kind of went into Slightly Stupid. And then a few tracks down, they would play Sublime, and it was like, I want to say it was April 1992 or whatever. I think, no, it was April 29th, 1992 played.
Okay, yeah.
And I was at work working, like I was a merchandiser, so I was putting signage out before the store opened in the morning. And there was just something about that song that's like, I've heard this song a million times as a kid and I always liked it then, but it just hit me harder. And I think it was because I was like, 19, 20 at the time. And I was like in the phase of smoking pot and kind of living free outside of my parents' house. Like I lived in a house with a bunch of my friends. It was a party house, but I was working so much, I was kind of coming and going. But I started smoking pot a lot around that time, and I was kind of into that just chill vibe kind of mood with my friends, and we were just a bunch of young dudes and chicks having a good time, like partying. And they always played a lot of that kind of music at their parties. But being at work, I heard that track, and I was like, dude, like it's got a little bit of punk rock and it's got this other stuff to it, and for whatever reason I gravitated towards it.
That song has always fucked me up just because like I think what he sings about, the date, is a different date that's printed on the fucking track thing. Like
I think at one time it was called something else.
Okay.
And they had changed it to fit the song, to serve the song, I think. I'm pretty sure I heard it or I seen it listed as another track on their earlier like releases.
Yeah. Well, I just know the dates. Like this motherfucker's not saying the date that's on the CD.
Right. It was a different like name for the track. So he definitely, I think, because he was also like going back to Sublime and like Bradley, like he would record stuff. And if you hear the earlier stuff, and you could find like earlier versions of songs that weren't yet created later on, and he would retitle them, and they would be more refined. Like things would be completely different. It'd be like a remix that was completely different.
Yeah. Huh.
So like for him, like I guess that's probably what happened. Is it was a different name and title, and then it changed as they went commercial. Like when they were working with MCI and recording and doing other things. I believe it's MCI. I can't remember.
Yeah. So like my first thing on Sublime was, I don't know, at the one school that I went to before I moved up here. I don't know. It was kind of like this hallway at lunchtime was like Spanish. This was black. This was white. Like, but like the skater kids, like it was like 311 and like older Sublime and like everyone. I've always had love for music. I was like the kid that walked around the fucking neighborhood with the boombox, like
right.
But they were like, check this out, and like I think it was like, I don't know, what's that one Sublime where it's got that guy talking throughout the whole, like every other couple
KRS
tracks.
One, maybe.
I don't know, but the album, it's got like some guy, he's like talking stupid shit, like.
Oh, okay. So it was their second album. It was their friend. He's a tattoo artist. I forget his name. Shit.
But he says like some off the wall shit. And they were like, check this out. And I'm like, I'm not really feeling this fucking.
Dude,
but then even on there, there's like.
Good stuff.
Yeah, here's like a CD, check it out. And like even then I was like, I like this 311 shit a little better.
Right.
But then like I don't know if it was, and it's so sad just because at the time it was almost like that was like that scene is the only people who really knew Sublime until like
Right.
he was already dead. Like
Right,
all
right.
these singles are coming out now. It's like everybody's on Sublime's dick. Like you're not getting new material from this.
Yeah, because
like,
commercially they weren't,
right.
they were kind of like a niche.
Which just makes you kind of think like, I mean, you can't control life, but like, what would they have ended up being like?
Had he not died.
Yeah.
Like, and it's weird because the way that the genre is now, had he been alive, I think he would have gone on to do like even more experimental, or maybe he wouldn't even be in the genre at all. So it's kind of hard to tell where he would go. But he's kind of like, I don't want to say he's the grandfather of reggae, because I mean, for me, there's a lot more reggae bands that came before him. And when you're talking like reggae, there's different styles of reggae too. There's like the roots reggae, like the Bob Marleys, and,
right,
and like the Gregory
original,
Isaacs
like,
and stuff like that.
Jamaican.
Right,
yeah.
right. And he was influenced when he took that trip with his dad to Jamaica, and he heard that island music that time. And then when he came back, he took the hip hop and the things that he liked, and all of his friends who were musically like into that, but who were musicians that like they would play and whatnot. I think like, and he took the elements of punk rock and all that, and I think that's what, as time went on, like that influenced me. Like, dude, it crosses, like punk rock crosses into reggae. And
Yeah, definitely.
There's like a real good relationship between that, and not just like the punk rock, but there's also like ska is like another crossover thing that kind of fits into all three. Like there's
and that's like a genre and that's something like people don't talk about like ska too much, but like that's something that
blew
I don't know
up
seems
too.
to hit my fucking. I just throw my phone in the car for a random and like, yeah, I get down on like Catch 22 or like shit like that,
right?
like
Or Operation Ivy, shit like that,
like,
right?
I just that's and I've never fucking I played clarinet in 5th grade just to fucking please whoever, but
Right.
I have no fucking music talent as far as horns, but like it was always catchy as shit, like, and it seemed like there was more on like the little bar scene back in the day. There was definitely more bands doing that ska shit, and then I feel like, okay, we got a couple like Mighty Mighty Ballstone hits, and then like, fuck this genre, like it's gone. I mean, it's not
right. You had
but,
your hit
but
or
now
miss
even now,
songs.
like, so like even with that reggae rock whatever, I mean, I feel like Slightly Stupid's bringing more horns in. I mean, there's definitely bands that are
right. It's changing the like, and it's kind of like a generational thing. So you had like your second wave, your third wave of like ska bands. It's kind of like that with like the punk rock and stuff. Like you had your early punk, it was very raw and kind of like in your face and brash. And then as time went on, they had like the punk rock and the pop punk and more refined stuff. So as each generational wave of that style of music has gone on, like of course there's sub-genres of all those, but if you're just sticking to that main genre, it has developed and changed and become more commercially like sounding, I would say. And as that kind of happened, like it only kind of grew like commercially too. But even if you're like a part of that whole like thing, like it's whether it's the ska, the reggae, like it was actually, and this is the thing most people don't realize, is that there were reggae bands, and like I would call them like jaw bands back in the 70s and like the late 60s. Like there was stuff that was out there prior to all this current stuff, right? And I feel like after the 90s, like after Sublime like had come and gone, like there were bands out there emulating or doing their own reggae rock and whatever they were calling it alternatively, but it wasn't. It was more of still a niche thing. Like maybe at one time the earlier roots reggae it was popular, but it wasn't popular enough to where it is now.
Yeah.
Like it's almost getting a microscope lens put over it more. So now people are looking back and looking what's been done and what's coming out now, and it's grown, especially from like I would say from the 2000s on, like the stuff Slightly Stupid was doing, where they were just like the 3-piece band. And then, like you said, they're bringing in horns, and they've changed a lot. Like I would say they do a lot of that crossover stuff too, right? Sublime with Rome does a lot of that crossover, like punk, ska, reggae. But now the big thing right now is like the big band, like putting a band of like horns and shit into it, and that's become a real big thing. Like there's bands like Bumpin' Uglies is doing it. There's jaw reggae bands like Fortunate Youth that are doing stuff like that, where there's not just like the guitar, the bass, and the drums now. It's like the horns have become a very integral part of the sound. And for live music, like that's huge.
For live music, I mean, it definitely adds the next level to your stage show.
But commercially now, it's becoming even bigger. Like that's where I think the genre is going. It seems to what's becoming more popular is the horn stuff, which I'm hit or miss on. Like, yeah, I love it, but it's not what I want to hear all the time. I put my music on. I like having that mix of some of the older stuff and like a 3 or 4 piece band or a 5 piece band without horns and stuff. Like,
oh yeah, definitely. It's
some of that stuff's cool.
You
like,
gotta be in the vibe too.
Right. But I couldn't hear like every song with a horn on it and stuff. Like there are certain songs. Like there's this band Less Than Jake, third wave ska band, and they use a lot of horns. But their breakout like album that got them famous when they were on Warner Brothers was Anthem. And there's actually, if you listen to it carefully, there's a lot of songs that don't have horns on them. And then there's a lot of songs that have some horn on it and have some saxophone on it. And I like that album. It was a breakout album. It's probably one of their best albums for the time. Now they've gone on to do better stuff, I think, in my opinion, as an artist. Like they've gotten way better. They're way more polished. They're great. And the stuff they create now is even more like refined as they've gotten better over time. And I can relate to a lot of what they make, but I feel like that album sticks out, maybe because of the time I heard it when I was in high school. But the songs, they weren't all like horns. Not every song was the same thing. Like they did different things, and they still sounded great, and they had a commercial sound. But like I see like right now, like in the reggae rock thing and the jaw music, there is a lot of that horns and band, like big band kind of like influence stuff, and that's always kind of been there. But like that's becoming a big thing, and I think it's because live music is such a big thing. I mean, it always has been, but it's bigger now than it's ever been. And after like COVID, people are like dying to get outside and go to shows. So it's a real like. The microscope, like I said, is kind of on it right now. So you've got bands like Bumpin' Uglies who do that, and they do it well.
Yeah, that's a band I've always liked since I heard them that I haven't seen live.
Right.
I really want to see them live.
And they were a 3-piece for a long time, doing the whole... it's weird because, like, Brandon from the Bumpin' Uglies, like the way he writes and sings, and he kind of like I don't know him directly. I've talked to him through like back when Facebook was a thing. Like it's still a thing, but I'm not on there. When before they kind of like put out The Beast from the East, I was kind of following him, and you could still go online and talk to him, and he would like reach out to you and stuff. And I would go see his shows. I was going through a lot of shit at the time, and I was just looking for a reason to get out of the house. So I was going to concerts more with friends and my wife, and we started following like Bumpin' Uglies. Like we would go to all their local shows and shit. And at that time, I don't think he was really traveling outside of the Annapolis area that much. Like they would go around the East Coast a little bit, but he really wasn't going out west or anything because they were kind of like a local tavern. Local brewery kind of band, and that was a time where they were actually expanding. So they put that record out, and it was like blowing up, and then that kind of led to them doing like the stuff they were doing now, whereas they're traveling all over. They're a touring band, like they're really touring now. But for me, it's like they were kind of like a 3-4. At that time, they were a 4-piece band when they put out Beast from the East because they had a keyboardist who did guitar as well.
And I think that addition to some bands is terrible.
It makes or breaks.
Yeah, like Clutch brought in a keyboardist for a while, and like some of the songs, like but like I don't know, I'm such a diehard Clutch fan. Like
Right.
I want clutch. Like,
Right, yeah,
I don't need the keyboard. Like, nah.
But
fuck
I think as an artist too, like as a band, you sometimes you try new things and
which is great.
Right,
I mean,
right.
because nobody wants to hear the same shit
over and over
right.
again, and some people do.
Yeah,
And some people don't want you to go away from what
I mean,
you
I don't.
do.
If I love a band, I don't want you to lose your sound. But
Right.
I also like.
I don't want you to repeat the same shit you've done from the start. Excuse me.
Right.
So I think like it was a lot of that with them. And the weird thing is, I wasn't real big on the keyboard, but their keyboardist like did some backing guitars. It really did add a lot of influence. Like their sound from the Beast from the East, like it was good. And I think what they've gone on to do now with like the horns and everything is great now too. Like I'm into it and I like it a lot, and they're freaking great. Not just live, but musically, those guys are phenomenal. And what the guy sings about, like, is just the way he sings, and like he's writing some real shit, and I can appreciate that.
And you're still talking about Bumpin' Uglies?
Yeah. So I can kind of gravitate to that, and that's kind of how I write with my music, Dumbo or Ugly, like.
Well, with the Bumpin' Uglies, like, I like a lot of their shit, and I almost compare like them and like Pasadena side by side, like,
right, which is
those
funny. Those
two
guys know
bands,
each other, and
like I really love, right? But like they've definitely, like, there's certain times I can't listen to them because some of their shit
dark sometimes,
and I appreciate it, but like,
but when you
certain
listen to
shit
that music,
I'm fucking going through, and then listening to their shit, like, yeah, I'm a fucking mental case anyway. Like, I don't want to go down this fucking dark hole, you know what I mean? But like, there's sometimes like I need to listen to it. Like, I need to fucking deal with my shit. Like, I need to figure it out.
Or you just want to hear a track. Like, you want to listen to some of their songs.
But then also sometimes you listen to a track and it's
it puts you in a mood.
Yeah. Then I'm like, fuck, I don't want my head
Limp
to be
Bizkit,
here. Like,
break shit. Like, you know, fucking, it puts you in that mood, man. I'm like pumped up, but I want to break some shit. I'm pissed. And it's funny because those guys actually, the more I listen to some of the earlier Bumpin' Uglies and some of his like acoustic stuff, like, he reminds me of the guy from Pasadena. I can't think of his name right now.
Yeah, I don't know his name off the top of my head.
Joey Harcum. That's it.
That is it.
And it's funny because when I didn't really know, like, I heard of Pasadena, but wasn't really, they were kind of like, I was in the Ballyhoo a lot during that time, Howie Spangler and his brother, and Ballyhoo was kind of what, like, when I was living in the house with my friends, I was introduced to them, and we would go down to Baltimore and Towson to see all the, you know, their shows locally. So I was real big into them, and they kind of helped me get into the reggae music, because they kind of have like a poppy rock. Like,
so that Ballyhoo was your.
They were kind of, well, the Sublime was already there.
To like Pasadena or Bumpin' Uglies.
Bumpin' Uglies more so. Pasadena's only been recently, only because I delved deeper into the local music and what was there around that time. For whatever reason, when I was going to see Ballyhoo and was big into that, like, seeing other bands and listening to that stuff on Pandora, I was exposed to like the Expandables, and during that time, like 2007 to 2010, like, Expandables was big for me. Like, they weren't as big as they are now, but for that niche, they were still kind of like the ones really digging, you know, that were really killing it. There were a bunch of smaller bands, like this band called the B Foundation. Great dudes, great fucking music. They were on a Halloween show in Towson with Ballyhoo, and that's how I saw them. This band, Can't Hang, was a local band from this area, you know, from the East Coast.
Maryland definitely has put out some fucking crucial. Have you heard of Grilled Lincolns? I'm not trying to cut you off.
Yeah, actually saw them too with Ballyhoo. They
I
were
like
great.
their shit too.
Right. So it's like a lot of those bands, like, the funny thing is, like, I don't know, when you think like of the good and loud like reggae bands, you think of like California, obviously.
Right.
And then there have been some in Florida that have done it great. They do a lot of ska music down there, ska punk. Like, there's this band called the Supervillains, fucking awesome, and they were a big touring act. As far as major, I don't know. Like, my idea and my vision of all that kind of like popularity thing is very skewed, because what I think popular is the shit that hit me hard, you know, stuff that I could relate to and the stuff that I thought was popular.
Yeah.
At least to me it was.
But yeah, I do feel like there's more of that style bands coming out of Florida as well.
Right.
Like Cashed Out's from somewhere
Cashed
down
Out.
there, right?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I think a few of the members are from Maryland.
Really?
Right.
Oh yeah, that's right. The guitarist.
Right. The guitarist and the
They
drummer,
did say something
at least,
about.
are from Maryland.
Yeah.
Both of those guys, I don't know where they're from in Maryland, but it's funny because it's like all that music, like it's not just a California thing anymore. There's bands all over. There's some big bands in Ohio
Yeah.
and stuff. So it's like this music is spreading. And it's not just a little niche anymore. Like it really has become a much bigger thing than I think the guys in the 90s ever thought it would be.
But I also feel like that's every style of music now. I feel
Right.
like you don't have to have these big record label deals. Everyone's putting their shit out independent, which is making people like, well, fuck it. Hey, I got a microphone.
Right,
like,
anybody can do it, really.
Yeah.
And I think, but it's how you do it. If you do it really well, people are going to listen to it. If people can relate to it, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, I still think that the 90s was a good time for raw music, and yeah, it was produced well and stuff, and that's what makes it everlasting. Like, bands like Nirvana, Alice in Chains and stuff, like, people recorded it well. They had record label contracts, so it was recorded and produced, commercially.
Yeah, but I mean, that time they were also trying to get rid of all the fucking hair bands. Like,
Right. Like, there's a
put
change.
on a flannel. Let's fucking rock out.
Let's sing a love song. It's just like the Cherry Pie guy from, He didn't want to do the song. It destroyed his career. He fucking hated the song. I think he ended up probably killing himself over it because the guy was like an alcoholic by that time. But it's like, the music, like, I feel like every genre that becomes commercial or has gotten big has had their moments where it wasn't as big and as niche, and as time goes on, it's either come and gone, and sometimes it's looked back on and it comes back. Like, it's like a history repeats itself thing, but it does change as it goes through different generational gaps.
Yeah, but also the one thing with music that's, I guess at our age, is so fucking great that people want that shit.
Right.
Like, so
right.
even
There
the
is
shit
a
that's
need
coming
for it.
out, and it's great because, like, I mean, I'm taking my teenage daughter to see
Bands that you saw when you were a teenager,
like
Godsmack or stuff like that.
fucking amazing, and
Right.
she's like rocking out and like singing. Like, I figured, maybe she's Spotify'd one song, and she's like, every fucking song they're doing live, she's singing it. Like,
Right.
I
And
didn't
and
fail
that's
her in this
crazy.
music situation.
Yeah, it's like a proud dad moment.
But
It's
then,
like,
but then
shit.
she'll be in a room like listening to fucking like, oh my god, I want to break her fucking speaker.
Right. I think that's cool. Like, being a father right now and taking my son to some of these shows. Like, I took him to a Bumpin' Ugly show where Joey Harcum was there. My pals, Higher Education, were there, and they're really good local. Like, they do some touring, but they're more of a local act, and they're phenomenal too. Like, they've had a lot of success. They're independent, so it is different from a touring, like a national touring act to like, and there's a lot of like breakdown of that and all of that I'm not going to get into, but independent bands have really, it's becoming more of a common thing, and I think it's because of the labels and self-promotion. It's much easier to do with the internet. The times have changed. Like, the tools are more accessible. The ability to self-promote, if you're motivated, is a lot easier than it was before.
Which is amazing too, because then
Right.
it puts, I mean, it's these artists that are putting in the work and not some guy.
Right.
And they're actually, I mean, if they work and get to that point, it's
Right.
money in their pocket, not filling other
People's
fucking
pockets,
right.
right? Like third parties that are taking most of the cost, like the label.
Like, buy the song off the iTunes, you get 2 or 3 cents out of it. And like,
now,
thanks for the
granted,
cut.
I'm sure there's still bands, even independently, that have to pull some of that money and pay other people, because there are people that work with them that produce them. A lot of them self-produce and stuff, but there are other people that do work for them, as far as like tour managers and stuff like that. I'm sure. Probably less so on the independent side of it, but there are bands that do tour full time that consider themselves independent, that do all in house, but still have to pay people, from some of the royalties. And
Oh yeah, I
stuff
mean,
too.
plus you're gonna get to a point you're not like, I'm not gonna set up my own fucking drum set. I'm gonna pay some like.
Right. You're paying, and you've got other people there that are part of your team that that help that day in day out operation of your band, especially if it's on a business level where it's like that's your job.
Yeah.
You quit working like 10 years ago or 5 years ago or how many years you've been doing the whole thing, and you were able to quit and you just tour full time and create music all the time. I think for me, like, shit, with what I'm doing right now, there's more pressure than there's ever been. And I think a lot of it's probably me putting more pressure on myself.
Definitely.
Because I want to put the music out. I want it to be good. I know I'm not, like, compared to the bands that we've talked about, compared to the people I look up as heroes or my musical influences, I want to be able to put out something that people can relate to, but I also don't want to make songs for other people. Like, the songs I'm making are about shit I've been through. They're about, like, the shit I'm dealing with, the stuff that I myself can relate to.
Right.
And if I'm able to put it out there and other people can listen to it, they like it, and they can relate to it, and they're like, holy shit, this is good. Like, that just gives me even more gratification and, like, cements it. But me personally, I'm wired differently. Like, I am super hard on myself. I've always been my worst enemy, like my biggest enemy too. So, like, there's like a perfection. Like, even though I know I can't be perfect, I aim over and over. I have to redo things over and over. And then I get to a point where I was like, 1 minute I love it and it sounds wonderful. And then I go back and listen to it again and I'm like, oh, that sucks. So I'm constantly, I have a need. And at some point I've learned recently that at some point you come to a wall and you're just like, if I don't put it out, it's never going to come out. So I'm constantly putting a lot of pressure on myself, and I don't really need it. It's not my job, like, but I make it a job. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've got this band now, and so I moved in from punk rock, and I did some metal stuff with those guys that were doing the thrash stuff. The Shortage, they were doing the thrash punk. They went into metal. I reconnected with them a few years ago when I was still living in that apartment that I spoke about earlier, and when I was with my wife and we got married, had my son, and I reconnected with them. One of the guys moved up to Hagerstown, Maryland, and I didn't even know he was living there. I just reached out to him recently, a few years back, because I was like, oh, I haven't talked to him. Man, I need to catch up with them because I knew they were doing a band, and I heard their last stuff, and it was pretty good. Like, haven't talked to him in a while, like, and it just happened so that he was like, oh, where? I was like, where do you live? Where do you live at now? Like, when should we meet up? And he was like, oh, I live in Hagerstown. I was like, holy shit, you live in the same town? So we reconnected, and we got together, and of course the three of them, the three dudes, the drummer, which is his brother, Chris, and the other guy, Greg, who was playing guitar with them the whole time. They had reconnected on and off for years because they often did things, but the brothers always kind of stayed. They did some metal stuff, and then I started playing with them. They were doing like groove metal. It was kind of like Pantera, thrash, but it was really their own thing, and they were always really great musicians. So I joined as the bass player, and I had done some stuff, my own stuff, acoustic stuff that I kind of retaught myself how to play guitar when I started listening to the Slightly Stupid and the Sublime a lot more when I got that apartment after I got married. And I sat down with like an acoustic and retaught myself how to play differently. Like, I was always into folk stuff, and I always kind of wanted to write an album that kind of told a story. And it's like from the very first track to the last track, I always wanted to kind of tell a story and kind of follow along like a book. But I never had the tools or the know-how to do it. So, like, the first thing that, before I could even get to that point, I wanted to reteach myself how to play with what I already knew how to play, bar chords. And I started, like, learning that, like, my narrow-minded, like, view of what you did kind of grew. So it was like, I did all that, and then I reconnected with those guys, and we started doing, like, the metal stuff. And they were just so superior compared to where I was. Like, musically, I knew I got way better, and people would tell me all the time, oh, the little stuff you're putting out, it's like cool as shit. It's good. It's really fucking good. But it was a different style of music. I hadn't played like heavy metal music and like the harder punk rock shit in a long time. Like, I was playing parts of that, but the metal stuff I hadn't played in a long time. And I was like, these guys were really thrashy, really like riff oriented. Like, everything was a riff. Everything was like built, and then solos were in every song. And these guys are fucking good, and I try to be very supportive of that still because I think they're great, regardless how they are as people. I always thought they were kind of cool dudes. We got along real well, but we had a falling out. Things were going good, and then we went to record like a demo. I paid my half, and they kind of fucked me over, and then they kicked me out of the band. Like, I guess there was a lot of infighting between the three of them on and off all the time. And at this point, like, I was in a different phase of my life, whereas I had a kid and a wife, and I hadn't seen him in years, but I kind of gone through a lot of like grown into an adult, and like some of the stuff that used to bother me didn't bother me anymore. But I was kind of like trying to mediate. Like when they would fight, I'd be like, "Hey man, like what the fuck? We're here to play music and have a good time. Plus you guys are brothers, and you know the other dude, like you all been playing music together for so long, and you're so polished and good, like." I don't understand why you guys are fighting over stupid shit all the time, like you're teenagers. Like, it's silly to me. So I would always try to be like.
And then you come in being the grown up.
Right. And the funny thing is, like, they are kind of grown up, but at the same time, they were always fighting over like petty, stupid shit. And musically, I'm not on their level. Like, they know that. I knew that, but I wanted to be a part of it, and they let me. And I thought, really, things were actually starting to work out. And it was funny, the day we went to record the album, my buddy Mike drove me down there because we lived in Hagerstown, and those other guys lived down, towards Baltimore. So they were closer to where we were recording. So we got coffee at like Starbucks that day, and we're driving down talking. And on the way back later that night from recording all day with their friend who records bands like professionally, I paid the money for the demo, my part of it, and we were driving back, and I had a heart-to-heart with Mike, and Mike was telling me, man, I'm really glad you're a part of this. I'm glad we've been able to reconnect, and I'm really glad that you're part of this. Like, there's nobody else that would fit with us the way that you do, and yeah, we have to, like, play catch-up with you probably to get you where we need you to be, but so far things are great. Like, and you're, like, impressing us with some of the stuff you're able to do. And like the way you've been able to kind of blend yourself in and get up to par so far. And then like a few days later, because we had this thing with band names. We have great concepts. We could make music and make things work. But names is always a fight, or coming to a conclusion or a decision was always tough for us. They had that problem before I came along, but I always had that problem myself, like with my bands before and my own personal stuff, like coming up with names and stuff. I just kind of had to land on something and then eventually go back and change it, or just learn to love what I created originally. So we came up with different band names and we couldn't agree on something. I kept coming up with ideas, whereas they were kind of like, they couldn't come up with anything. And finally I landed on this really cool one, because a previous band that they had was a metal band that they called, it was like Five Plagues Deep, out of Baltimore like area, and their music was great. So I was like, okay, this.
And they were in that band, or they?
Yeah. It was primarily them, and then they had like a bass player, and then they had a singer. Because my buddy Mike didn't sing anymore. Like, he didn't want to sing. He just focused on guitar with Greg, and his brother was the drummer, Chris. So I was like, and this was pre-COVID. Like, this was before COVID happened. But politically, between the Trump thing and all that, like, so I had come up with a few like bands. I thought of also moniker, like when you're gonna play a show, like sometimes bands change their name, especially when you start touring or you commercial, like, and I was like, well, these guys are definitely gonna go somewhere because they're phenomenal. They'd be stupid not to, but they always kind of lacked that kind of just putting themselves out there. Like, yeah, they played shows in taverns and shit. They weren't very good about marketing. It was like they were waiting for something to happen. They were waiting for somebody to come along and put it in that direction, or they were sure they knew their shit was good, but they would play shows, but they were like instrumentals. There was no like vocals or anything to them, and
just a jam band.
Right, but they could have been, and they wanted to. They wanted to get vocals, and they wanted to get a singer or something, but they just never like. They always got together, they practiced, they were solid. They've been playing together for years on and off in different projects, but they had always played together. So they were really solid dudes, and they were it was kind of like an inner circle thing. And I was on the outside of that circle because I wasn't there all those years. Like, I was there at one point, but as like a supportive person.
Right.
Because I was from a different band when we first all met, punk bands, and I was just like, I was a member, but I wasn't. Like, I was around. I wasn't physically recording or playing shows with them, but I was always at their shows. I was always being a roadie. I was bringing their shit in. I knew all the songs. I was always talking about their songs and being like, hey, you guys are good. Like, you need to do something with this. Like, you guys could be on a label. Like, you could be out there playing shows and then eventually touring. Like, you have the goods. I was saying that, like, when they were 15, 16. Later on, I was saying that again later on, even though I had kind of disappeared and went a different direction and hadn't seen them for a while because I moved to a different area, like, and I hadn't stayed in contact with them. We all kind of went our separate ways, and, you know, they went one way, I went a different way. As I was growing up, like, we did reconnect, and I was like, dude, you guys are even better, way better now. Like, you guys, like, the shit you guys are playing and the sound you guys are creating is stuff that could be played on the radio. Like, you're that fucking good, and that's without, like, you could literally play, record without any plugins, without any other bullshit. You could literally take your phone, hit a video, and the stuff that you guys are playing and the sound that's coming out of that phone is something that could be played on the radio right now on a heavy, you know, heavy rock station metal. They're that fucking good, and they were clean. Like, it didn't, you know, like, they were a live act. Like, you go and you wouldn't be disappointed. Whatever they did on the record would sound exactly that way or better. That's how good these guys are and how polished they are as musicians and just with each other, the way they play. And they could be noodling around. Like, they could be just practicing a song, and you're like, they would stop because they fucked up, and you wouldn't even know because it was that good. like if you didn't, like, have that artistry, like, stuff of knowing the song or knowing as an artist, like, oh, he fucked up on that note. Like, you would have no idea.
Yeah.
And so they were that good, and I was really trying to be supportive. And I said, whether I was in the band or not, I wanted to be supportive of them, and I wanted to see them do something with it. But we did have a falling out after I got kicked out of the band, and I think it wasn't the fact that I wasn't in the band. It was more so the way in which it happened, and what was kind of like the reasoning was bullshit. Like, it wasn't the real reason. Like, a fraction of it could have been from maybe one or two of the members, but they pulled one over on me, so it kind of hurt because I knew them for a long time, and they were really good friends. I always thought of them, like, very highly, and I'm sure it didn't mean shit to them.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I kind of, like, I walked away from them after that and stopped talking. My buddy moved away, but I wasn't talking to him anyway. And then I don't know where the fuck they are now. I know that the main one that I was close with, Mike, he had a kid, and I don't know. I think he might be married now, but he was with somebody serious, the one he had the kid with. So after he moved, like, I haven't talked to him since that time when shit went out. But the fucked up part of it was, like, a few days before I got kicked out of the band, he was telling me, oh, I'm glad you're part of this project. I'm glad, like, it's good to have you. I feel like you fit. Like, out of anybody that could have, like, been the bass player, anybody who could have shown up and joined the band, like, you're the perfect fit. Because you mesh with us, you know the history of us. So, like, I don't know, man, like, it was kind of fuckery. So I took time off. Like, I have been doing solo stuff, like, on the acoustic for a long time. I always kind of wanted to do the reggae thing when I got back into it, and I was teaching myself the style, like, Bradley style, and, like,
yeah, but what was the deal with the reach around, if that was going to be the end result of,
well, I think,
hey, we love you, but, like, get the fuck out. Like,
well, I think it was more so my buddy Mike. So I think Mike loved having me there. Like, the other guys were, like, glad that I was there. Like, his brother Chris was glad I was there, but Chris was like, oh, he's not as polished as us. Like, he knew, like, he was pretty bold. And he's kind of honest. Like, he didn't want to upset me, but I think he was like, well, he's not on the level we are.
But yes, you knew that.
I knew that going in, that I was, like, I knew how to play, but I didn't know how to play.
But they knew that when they took you in. So
right. Well, I think, and they wanted to have somebody jam. They thought it was cool. So they tried it out a few times, and it just kind of was like, well, it's always good to see them and, like, hang out. So, like, fuck it, why not?
Right,
and
I get that.
Chris was more of like, well, yeah, we need to get him up to par. Because we expect a certain level of professionalism, and even though we're not a touring band, like, we want it to sound good when we do start playing live. So we did a few live shows, like, before I got kicked out, before we started doing the demo. And the first show, like, I played with them was rough, and then I had learned some of the other songs, and I was prepared the second one. But I never got that really like that chance because I was kicked out by the time we went to go do more shows. And it was like around the demo, but we were getting to the point like we were playing practices and people would hear us because we were jamming out of a garage that was open. We were real loud in the neighborhood, so people drove by and were like digging the shit. He had family members because he'd have barbecues all the time, and they were digging the shit. I mean, they would have dug it whether I was there or not, but I think it was more of my buddy Mike. My buddy Mike was happy to see me, glad that we reconnected, and he was glad that me and him could jam together, and he was getting me up to par. I think it was more so his brother Chris and the other guy Greg, and the other guy Greg and me have had on and off stuff. I've never really, like, I don't know, man. I don't like fight with people. Like, I always want the best out of people. I don't get...
Yeah, I definitely always get that vibe from...
I don't get jealous or envious. Like, I am envious. Like, personally, I'm envious. Like, when I see somebody succeed, yeah, I want that, and I'm happy. But I'm always happy for them first. Like, that for me is, like, I'm happy to see my friends succeed. I'm happy to see people I know or have known succeed. And I want that for them. So that's just the kind of person I am. Like, I don't... Like, jealousy... don't really have it. Like, I'm envious. Like, I want those things for myself, but it's not. If it's not meant for me, it's not meant for me.
Right.
Like, and I'm okay with that. It's just like, but I'm not gonna die not trying. I might be really hard on myself and be like, oh man, I should be there when I'm not there, and I suck. But like, if I see somebody else, like, for an example, and a friend of mine got married, bought a house, like. I was like, man, shit, I wish I could buy a house. Like, it sucks I'm not where he's at, and we're the same age, and, you know, people go back and look at Facebook and compare each other, like, and I think that's the biggest fucking stupid thing of all, looking back on it now, and I spent a lot of time doing that, comparing myself to friends or family members or stuff, and, like, beating myself up over it, or saying, like, I'm here, and why am I not there? Like, they made it there before me.
As far as life in general,
life
or
in general,
music, or
and musically, like everything. Like, I've always tried to compare it to like whatever is going on in my life to other people, and I know a lot of other people do that. And I've gotten away from that now, so I feel like things are much better in my life, especially the last like 4 or 5 years.
It's definitely healthier. When
Right,
you're not.
it is, and I think that's kind of like I had to peel back. I had to really look at myself and kind of like look in the mirror and be like, well, you know. I may not be super successful, but I've come a long way personally, and I never thought I'd be where I'm at. And then I bought a home, and I'm like, shit, like these things are obtainable, but I have a different path, and how I got there was a different path. And all this time, like I was holding myself back from getting to that goal or getting to that part of my life because I was always comparing myself, and I was like downing myself. So I probably could have been or reached these goals or gotten to these things sooner had I always didn't put myself down or question why the fuck I haven't gotten there yet.
Concentrated on your own shit and not somebody else's.
Right, and sometimes naturally you get there at different times. Like, not everybody's going to own a home before they're 30. Like, sometimes things take times. We all have different jobs. We all have different passions. We all have different paths. We all have hardship, but we have hardship in different ways or at different times, or different scenarios happen. Some are worse than others. Some are just as bad, but we are built differently mentally too to handle things differently. So some of us fly and coast through it, and others don't. And as shit happens, you cope and you get better at it, but other times you don't. So like, and then sometimes you struggle, you learn the hardships, you learn to cope, and you like look back and you're like, man, that's it. That shit that happened to me years ago. Like nowadays, it's silly. Or sometimes you regress, like you've gotten past a certain point and then something happens similar and you're like, I already know this lesson. Like, why am I dealing with this as a bitch? Like now.
But I feel like struggle is, I don't know. I mean, you weren't handed the shit.
No.
And just like, I mean, I try to teach my daughter, like, which I pretty much hand her every fucking thing, but,
Right, I think all of us do.
I feel like I respect my shit more knowing what I've had to go to get here.
Right,
so,
and what to obtain this.
So I'm trying to be like, oh, look, I can give this to you. And now I'm like, fucking work for it. Like,
right.
Learn your struggles. Like, get your game up.
Right. It's like, I don't want to, like, I can totally relate because as a parent, like, my kid's like, what? He's like 10 years old. And my parents, I will say, like, we had struggles, but my parents were definitely like, I would say middle class. Like, they were working a lot, but they also sacrificed a lot of time and worked their ass off to give us what we had. So we weren't poor by any means, right? But when I was first growing up, like my parents had to work to that point that they were middle class. Like they weren't handed anything. They worked their asses off.
Yeah, but even
for that
nowadays,
shit.
I see people. I mean, not hating on what somebody has, but like, I mean, even like you don't know what this motherfucker did to get to this point in their life. I mean,
Right.
like I do know your dad was a workaholic. Like,
Oh my god!
I mean,
And he was a miserable guy to be around sometimes because of it.
right. I mean, even over the years, he was.
Kind of a dick.
Every time when I was around, he was like a one word, like
Yeah, he was a man of
like
few words.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
But
You had to catch him at a right time when he was silly and just in the mood.
But one thing you could never say was, "Oh, my dad was lazy." Like that's
Right.
one thing you'll never
Right.
be because.
And when you're a kid, I don't think you. Some of us grow up faster than others. Some of us are brought up in different, like I guess, scenarios. Different. Some people grow up faster than others and are aware of that. So like, for people who do come from a poor background or a rough life, tend to grow up like quicker, and they're more aware of, fuck man, like we didn't have everything and yeah, it sucked, but like you can learn to appreciate what you've been given sooner.
Right.
And for me, it's like, I always knew I was like blessed. My parents gave a lot and we were very fortunate. But as an adult now and as a parent myself and somebody who's worked my ass off, like, and not only sacrificed a lot, but my body and my mind and my soul, like, to working and trying to get ahead and have these things and then be able to provide those things and give a better life to my kid. Like, I'll be lucky if I could give my son, just having one and coming from a family of 4 kids, like, I'll be lucky if I can even give my son a fraction of what my parents gave me. Right? Like I'll sacrifice my time and work my ass off to give him that. And maybe he has more than what I did then. You also got to think there were 4 of us.
Yeah.
There's just one of him. So he's going to be naturally spoiled. And I spoil the shit out of him. But I also try to instill those things of being humble, which is hard for him. And I'm a stubborn bastard too. Like as a kid, I could have had the world and I still would have been crying and bitching about it.
Yeah, but
stuff.
I feel like that's not trying to
maybe
dog a
kinda
whole
natural.
group of people, but I feel like that's kids these days.
Right,
And I know
entitlement.
like people used to say like when we were growing up, oh, that's kids these days.
Dude,
So it's everybody.
right. I think it's an every generation thing because I'm sure even like my grandparents' generation thought that way of like my parents, in their generation, like they were handed a lot of shit. They didn't have to struggle in the depression like my grandparents did.
Yeah.
Life was much easier. I mean, money was different, so maybe things cost more. You had to work more for that, and that's kind of like what my parents were saying. Now is like, they're like, oh, you guys don't know, you don't know shit about working and the struggles we've had to been through, but we do, and just a different way.
Right.
Like that history has repeated. It's just a different time and a different place. And the value of our money, like the money my parents were making got you a lot further than what the same amount of money I'd make if I was making the same they were making.
Oh, definitely.
Like the times are different.
And definitely now.
And that's where
now
a lot of that
everything's-
struggle comes from. Like, so the struggle is still there. And it's even harder now, I think. Honestly, like they say, oh, you didn't have it as bad as we did. But I think we have it harder now, and the next generation is going to even have it harder than us. So we can bitch and complain, saying, "Well, you need to be humble for what the fuck we're doing because it's fucking hard." Like, and I'm stressing myself out.
No, but that's what I am gonna do because that's what
Right.
I heard. So fuck you.
Right,
like,
right.
Deal with it.
It's gonna repeat, and I think that's just a normal, like, general. That's a parenting thing, like. But I think naturally you want to give your child, like, out of love, like you want to give them everything, and you know that they need to have the things they need. You want them to have the things they want, and at the end of the day, though, you want them to be humble, and you want them to not take shit for granted because you can't always have what you want, but you definitely always need to have what you need.
Right.
Right? So you want to try to prepare them for the world and give them what they need to survive, because that's the end game. Is I can't be around forever. Someday I'm going to die. And you want them to have the tools to succeed and to get by, regardless of how hard it's going to be. You try to prepare them, and it's not always easy. Like, you find yourself snapping sometimes, and then you think about, oh shit, my parents were like that too, and I don't want to be like them. Like, I want to take the good things I learned from them.
Yeah.
but you want to also separate yourself by not doing the bad shit that scarred you, you know, mentally. And it's hard though, because sometimes I'm sure I was the same way, but these kids nowadays too, or there's more ADHD, there's more like.
Well, it's more talked about. It's okay though, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I figured maybe if back in the day it would have been a thing to have, it'd be okay to be fucked up, get help, take a med, like something, talk to somebody.
Right.
But like as a man back then, like.
It's like that shit doesn't exist,
right.
And you're stupid, you're crazy. Do you want me to take you to a mental institution?
So you wouldn't get help, so you fucked me up more, but like.
Right.
I mean.
But now you just want me to snap out of it. Like,
right.
And that's not possible.
And like you said, I try to not, if I see like him coming out of me, like I'll try to like, I gotta back this shit up because I fucking hate this. Like.
Right.
And I don't, so.
You don't want to be that way.
No, not at all. But let's go back to music, because if we're going to do this podcast thing every week, we can definitely get into some fucked up mental family issues shit.
Right. But I guess back into like the music, like it was good. It's cool. Like I think for you, it's cool to kind of see your kid like the music that you were growing up like as a teenager listening to, and it's still kind of like relevant.
Right.
So like for me, I took my son to some shows of the music that I listen to that he hears in the car all the time. He's been hearing bands and songs that I listen to now that came out forever ago, and he loves it, right? So I catch him in the shower, like I'll be in the other room, he'll be in the shower singing songs that like Fortunate Youth songs and shit like that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm like, that's awesome. It's cool I get to share that with him. And now, like, he's been to a few shows now. Like, his first show was a value show with higher education. And he was like, first he was like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to like this, because he doesn't like loud noise. But he fell in love with higher education. He loves value. Like, and he sings their songs. Like,
and you've taken him to see them like multiple times now, right?
Yeah, because they play a lot of local stuff when they're not, out on tour, like tour. And so I'll take them if I see a show that I can make and I can go to, like, we'll do that. Like, so we did a little YouTube channel for him, and I'm very careful about what I put out there for him because, he's still a kid, and I'm just very protective over him anyway. But musically, like, it's just so cool to have him, like, into the same music that's been out for a while and just have him relate on that same level. So what I do now is reggae. Like, I went from the punk rock thing, did some metal music, did some folk music and some solo shit, acoustic stuff. And reggae kind of like was like, I didn't know how to play it. I know it sounds easy to play. I think most people probably have no problem playing it at all.
I got a guitar and a spliff. Let's play some reggae.
Yeah, and let me just do downstrokes or upstrokes, and stuff like that, like bar chords and strokes. But the technique, like, I was like, fuck, man, I don't know how to fucking play it. I've always tried, and I'm like, I make things overcomplicated. Like, I overthink shit a lot. So for me, it was, like, tough to get to that point. And I was like, this time, like, earlier this year, 2023, like, I wanted to finally do it. Like, I had kind of, like, acoustically, I'd done some reggae-ish kind of style stuff with my playing now, and I was kind of trying new things. And I was like, I still don't know how to do it right, but I'm gonna kind of fucking do it and figure it out. And I'm still the kind of guy that sits in a room down in his basement or his music room or whatever now. Used to be a bedroom. Now it's an actual, like, fucking little studio. And I'll sit there and I'll practice for hours. And I started, like, listen to things. I try to emulate the music, and I started figuring it out. So I was like, cool, I can pull my punk rock, like, bar chord shit and some of the soloing shit and all the different styles of music that I like and that I've learned to play, the techniques, and, like, finally do this shit. Like, I've been wanting to do a reggae thing but didn't know how to approach it. And I was always kind of self-conscious because I was like, I don't want to get with people that know how to play really well and then I'm sticking out like a sore thumb like they did with my friends that I thought I was cool with. And so I was like, I've always been kind of like, a lot of those things have always led me to disappointment in myself and not feeling that I've ever been good enough. And then I've had people tell me I'm fucking great. Like, they know I'm really good. And I've just never really seen it that way in my eyes. Like, I know I'm okay, but as an artist, like, I'm not phenomenal.
Yeah, plus you don't take compliments good because, like, I think
don't,
you're fucking
man.
amazing, dude. And, like,
I don't.
when you come here and you're like, it's
like,
all
it's
right.
good to
like,
feel.
Nah,
it's good to feel.
fucking
But
awesome, dude.
I'm
like,
my worst critic, man.
and
I
that's
think-
probably good. I
Right.
mean,
It's made me, but it's also.
I think, fucked you up a little bit more, too.
It's negative and bad mentally, and it weighs on me. But at the same time, it's also pushed me to get better. Like, nah, man, I suck, and I gotta keep practicing and practice, and I gotta go and creatively, like, I've always been there. Like, creatively, I've had these ideas and these ways of doing things differently and original. So, like, the creative side of my brain's like, yeah, but the actual, like, physical playing part and, like, where to take it's never been a problem. It's been playing it well, and then playing it as if I was playing it live, and then the expectation of going to see a band like Third Eye Blind. When you hear a CD, when you go see them live, it's not a CD. In fact, it sucks.
Oh, do they?
And there's bands. Well, that was my experience, but there's been bands too that play live on the CD. Like, they'll do the CD, it sounds great, and that's what you're expecting to go to hear. And it sounded exactly like the CD. Or there's been times I've gone to see bands, the album was great, and then I go to see them live, and they've even been better.
Yeah.
Like, their live performance was even better than the album, so it's like, cool, yeah, I'd see them again. And then there's bands like Third Eye Blind, I saw them one time, and they sounded like shit. No offense to them, I'm sure they're great.
Yeah,
but
like, there's definitely, like, I put Godsmack, Disturbed, Linkin Park, when Chester was alive. Like, I feel like, I mean, you're listening to the fucking CD.
Right, or something better. Like, the performance
Right.
is
Oh, yeah,
dead
Godsmack
on.
show is
They're
amazing.
solid and they're together. Like, it's just fucking great. And I mean, some of those guys have been out for a long time too, and they're aware. Like, they're like, because I'm sure some of those bands could get away with sounding like shit, and they'd still sell tickets. Clear example. Not trying to knock Motley Crue, but Motley Crue, like, Mick Mars is awesome.
He's not even there.
Yeah,
they got
he's
John
gone.
5
John
now.
5, which John 5 in his own right is good.
That
But
I downloaded. Well, I was a big John 5 fan anyway, but he's got a bunch of, like, solo shit where,
Right.
and I swear that motherfucker can put strings on anything
and play
make
it
it
well.
sound fucking amazing.
right, and I'm sure, and he's probably having a fucking blast. But as far as, like, the rest of the band, like, not gonna knock, like, Six and all that, but I never really thought highly of, Six's like, performance. To be honest with you, Vince Neil was never a great singer.
No.
Never. I mean, the albums they made, shit magic happen, and their early performances, sure, it was raw, and that was a time where they could pull it off then. But I mean, you age, your vocal cords change.
Oh,
You
yeah,
let
his
yourself
vocals
go
are
on.
gone. Yeah.
Like, you do, like, and that's what they have to work with. So yeah, I mean, I guess I can appreciate he's not using auto-tune. I mean, I'm sorry, live. You know what I mean? Like, somebody like Frankie Valli, who was still touring a few years ago. I don't know if he's still touring now, but was using auto-tune. But I mean, look at the way Frankie Valli sings.
Right.
Like, that's, his age is probably very difficult to fucking sound like that now.
But even like 2 weeks ago, we were in the Ocean City for a weekend, and they had some, like, free music fest with, like, some artsy fartsy craft shit, and there was a couple bands I wanted to see, but at the end of the day, I definitely wanted to see Spin Doctors.
Right. Oh,
And,
Spin Doctors, yeah, big 90s.
Like, I'd like the the radio hits. Like, I never dug deep into their
like their other
catalog.
songs.
Yeah, so
Right.
I mean, I was expecting, like, Little Miss Can't Be Wrong, like, stuff like that, but, like, they came out on stage, like, to a Muddy Waters song, and they were bluesy as shit.
Right.
And at the age they are, like, they fucking sound like, I would have paid to go, like, if they come around again, like, yeah, you can take my money, like, I'll pay to go see it. But, and also when I came home, I downloaded a bunch of their shit because I do like that blues sound, and like,
and stuff that you
and I'm
never
like,
thought of before,
fuck,
stuff
like,
that you listened to.
I've had these CDs. I skipped over some of these tracks to
Right.
get to what the radio was pushing in my head, and, like, look at this shit that I
Well,
missed.
and it
like,
wasn't relative to, like, I think your taste over time changes too, so you're more acceptable of other stuff as you've gotten older and you've listened to different styles of music. Like, musically, your mind has expanded, so you're, like, more prone to go back and, like, just sit there and listen all the way through and actually hear the songs a different way. Like, whereas you were young, you're like, oh, I'm going to that hit song I like, something I know I've heard, something I know I like. Whereas like, the rest of these were different. This is one what is at the time you weren't expecting that from them.
But like, I mean, I don't know if you've dug into any kind of Spin Doctors like shit, but like,
not Spin Doctors, but I've had the same experience with other bands where I've gone back and I've listened to them like, holy shit, like I skipped all this shit before and there's other good shit on this.
Well, like I like blues. I mean, I like old blues and like even newer blues, but like, I mean, you got the old school blues where it's sound quality sounds like shit just because the record, but like, I mean, even growing up, my dad listened to classic rock, so like, I always knew like George Thorogood's hits or like ZZ Top hits, which going back now, like
very bluesy
and like I listened to and like even like their greatest hits. Like I went back and downloaded shit that wasn't the greatest hits album, and like
you find treasures, like treasures on there.
Amazing.
It is, and the funny thing is like most music, like if you go back, like obviously classical and stuff, like orchestrated shit and like Beethoven and stuff like that, but really like 1900s, like you had like the orchestrated big band shit, but it was really country music, jazz music, and blues. Like those were like after rock kind of developed off that. If you look at all the genres of music now that were like reggae and all that, they were influenced by blues or country music, pop generated from country music.
Yeah, but then you even got like the
bluegrass,
the classic, like I don't want to say it's classic because that might be fucked up, but like the slave songs, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's become over music history.
Right.
Like,
it's generated and influenced, and it has grown into other like areas of music.
Right.
Right.
I mean, a lot more than what people would think. You know what I mean?
Right. Like where there was just one or a few genres, it has expanded and it branches out like a tree. Like there's so many different styles of music, but they all fundamentally came from somewhere else.
Right.
And they branched out. Like it may not sound anything like the original style of music, but had that music not existed, it wouldn't have become a thing at all. So it's like a bush, it kind of grew out, or a tree where it's kind of branched out. So I think that's kind of like, that's what's surprising is you said that about Spin Doctors is like a lot of these bands, like you don't realize how influenced and how like bluesy or pop, like where they came, like how much like in the depth where their like main elements came from. So it's cool, like now that we've had musical taste and shit, like I find myself doing the same thing. Like I'll go back and listen to bands I liked before and I liked a few songs or I like most of the album, and I'll go back to songs I skipped over or didn't really like at the time, and I'll sit there and I'm like, holy shit, how did I miss this? In fact, I like this better than some of the songs I always liked.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
Like even the commercial songs that got overplayed, that like they had better songs than some of the shit that was on the radio. Like, how did they skip these? Was it because it wasn't like commercial friendly, like as far as like language wise, or like why wasn't this the hit? And I often, like, there's a lot of bands I've gone back and listened to, and I'm like, I like some of those songs that you wouldn't think would be commercial at all, and I like them better.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate them like as an artist, musician, like even more. Like, I don't know, man. Like for some people like songs for whatever reasons. They like songs, like maybe the sound or the lyrical content to them, or just the feeling they get, the vibe they get off of it, or the nostalgia of it if they've heard it and it made them, some shit was going on and it was just an important part of their life. And that's what it is. It's expression. Like music, like it's how it connects with you, and it may connect with you and give you a feeling of something else to compare to somebody else who likes the same music or the same track. So music is like really just, it's powerful in that sense. Is like you can connect on the same things with other people who listen to the same shit, or you completely have a different feeling or emotion than that other person, and it may mean more to you in a different way.
Yeah, but music, I mean...
But it's so universal.
Yeah,
like,
music hits everybody. I mean, even to the fact, like, when we were at the beach, I made this comment, like, fuck your life. Like, I don't know if you know who Nims is. Like,
yeah, I know Nims. Yeah, New Jersey.
Yeah. Coney Island. Yeah. But,
fuck
like,
your life.
Yeah, so I was like, fuck your life. And, like, a little 12, I mean, he was little. He was like, bing bong. Like, like cool. Like, and then, like, all throughout the weekend, like
Bing
every time I
bong.
seen him, he's like, say it. And I was like, say what? He's like, I can't say it. I was like,
Fuck
what?
your
Fuck
life.
your life. And he
Yeah,
was like,
bing
bing bong.
bong.
Like, so that was like a thing. But like,
Right.
I mean, how would I connect it to this fucking kid? Like,
right.
and
Normally
he
you wouldn't have said anything.
and there was no fucking hesitation for this little kid. Like,
Right.
cool.
Right. Then you're worried about like, oh shit, his parents.
Nah, fuck it.
He's like, I don't know these strangers. Like, that's cool as shit. And it's funny because that guy wasn't huge either. He was just a local dude trying to do his thing and make something.
Man, I went down the rabbit hole of him. Speaking of music, and like, that dude was still fucking a trash man. And people are like, I know you. Like, nah, motherfucker, you don't know me. Like,
Right.
And he never gave up.
Right.
Like, he's got one song, I can't remember the name off it at the top of my head, but like, it's been my go-to, and it's not one of his newer tracks, but it's been my go-to. It like, it self-motivates me, like,
To get up and do shit.
yeah, like he was hungry, he was fucking gonna get it. And
Right.
like, even like having seen him sit on like different interviews, and he's like, nah, like, this is not the furthest I'm gonna go. Like, I knew this was gonna happen. Like,
Right. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen, but until then I'm going to keep moving.
right. And then
that's kind of the
And like, as
mindset.
people were talking, like, he was like, fuck that. Like, I was just trash man. I was still getting my benefits. I had like 401k, just shit. Like,
Right.
so like, I mean, he
It
played the
doesn't
game
stop.
and he played it smart.
Right.
So
It doesn't stop. And I think as an artist, you can't like stop. So for me, like, I don't see myself like I would love to see myself touring. I'd like to see some sort of success, but I'd be okay with not being like commercial. I'd be okay with not being a super hit. But I think I would really love to be performing in front of people. I would really love to see the passion of my music, like, people relate to it and sing along with it and shit. And I think that to me would bring me to a even more higher place in my life. But it's not something I need. Like, it's not something that I can live without it. Would I love for it to happen? Yeah. Is it something I'm dying to work towards? Yeah. Like, I'm never gonna stop that. Like, I want to get to that point, and if I get there and not, at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to let it go at some point. But yeah, that's where I want to go. But shit, man, like, it's crazy how he was talking about that, because I think for some artists it is hard. Like, and there's this weird like thing when you're younger, from like teen on to your early 20s, is like, and it's funny because Brandon from Bumpin' Uglies was like this too, where because I've heard him talk about it before, is that like he felt like when he got to 30, it was either do or die, and if you got to 30, you were getting too old to make it.
right.
And I've always kind of felt that way. A lot of younger like artists have always felt that way, but I'm seeing the point now that doesn't fucking matter, because regardless of if you make it at 30 or you make it at all, like, you don't stop trying. If you stop trying, unless it's negative, like if you're putting that much into it and you're only pulling negative away from it and you're not happy doing it, then don't do it. But if you're happy and you're still hungry and you're still pushing to do it, why stop? Sure, you might not be a radio hit, right? Or you might not have hit songs, but doesn't mean you can't have a following. Doesn't mean you can't perform in front
Plus,
of
if you
people.
got a goal, it gives you something to keep trying to reach for.
Right.
I mean, like, I eventually want to do an open, like, even if that's the farthest I get is an open mic night doing stand-up, like, that's what I want to do. But I got my own issues trying to fight through to, like, so this is part of the reason why I kind of wanted to start this. Maybe get a little comfortable. I hate my fucking voice. Like, get a little comfortable hearing this.
Which is crazy to me, because your voice is actually good.
And then, like, and we'll talk about stand-up and shit another thing, but, like, the fear, and you talked about it, I don't know what we were talking about, but just, like, not fuck people, but fuck what they think about you.
Right.
And, like, I try to get that in my head, and then I get, like, gun-ho, like, let's do this shit. Then I'm
right.
like,
But then your self-consciousness,
yeah,
like, and you're
something
like,
in me
shit.
is like, I do care what these fucking strangers
Right,
think.
I don't want to be on the
I
hot
don't want to
seat.
eat this bag of dicks on stage because I'm
Right.
going to say something they don't like. So,
Right. You don't want to crash and burn.
right.